Hello, this is Jules. This video is a spiral dynamics perspective on the history and future of education. First, what is education? Essentially, it's a method for developing human beings. But why does its form change over history? Why does education even have a history? Well, a culture and its education system are always in a feedback loop with each other. The culture affects the education system. Our values determine what we choose to develop, and our understanding of ourselves governs how we enact that development. And then, in turn, the education system furthers the culture's consciousness progression, and progressing consciousness shifts our values and shifts our understanding of ourselves. So this becomes a loop as the new values and the new updated understanding of ourselves then affects the education system and changes what we choose to develop and how we enact that development. So because of this, we can use a model of consciousness progression like spiral dynamics to understand the history of education and to predict the future of education. So let's return to our familiar spiral. If this is not familiar to you, then I recommend that you check out the beginner overview videos on my channel for spiral dynamics. There's a part 1 that covers tier 1 and a part 2 that covers tier 2, and that context would be very helpful for understanding this video. So assuming that you are now at least at a basic level familiar with the stages of spiral dynamics consciousness progression, I'm going to discuss the history of education using this model as a framework for understanding it. In my overview videos, I talked about the general history of humanity in terms of these stages. Now I'm talking about a single thread through that history, and that is the history of our education. So in beige stage, education is basically concrete trial and error. Each stage has its own set of values. Those values change from stage to stage, and those values determine what the goals are of each stage. And those goals determine what is being developed. So in beige, the concern is survival and basic needs. So the necessities of the education, which isn't really a system yet, is purely specific, concrete trial and error. An example of this is, I touched that thing, it was hot, it burned me, I'm not going to touch it again. That's concrete trial and error, beige style education. Purple stage education is essentially oral history. And you see this through tribal cultures, but you also see it in other purple stage social settings. A really great example is rumor mills. Rumor mills are a form of oral history. So to reiterate something that I'm pretty sure I said before, each of these stages doesn't go away when you progress past it. Development is cumulative. So we don't lose access to trial and error methods just because we're no longer in beige stage, and we don't lose access to oral history just because we're no longer in purple stage. We still retain both of those. It's just we now have more tools at our disposal. So red stage education historically was warrior training. The goals here were to train physical abilities and to train the values of red stage, like loyalty and bravery, things like that. Blue stage education historically was monastic education. Very strict, religious-based. Basically, the education was through the religion of the culture. Orange stage education is what we have now as our current conventional education system. It's based around science and mathematics. All of the schools in the education system operate like businesses. And the goals are things like getting a job and furthering left brain academic style knowledge. So you can see orange values in how our current conventional education system works. Green stage education is currently in our alternative education movement. The characteristics of a green stage education are things like totally flat hierarchy. It's very student-driven. It's about exploring individual interests. So it's often about trying lots of different things, and it's also very individualized. So instead of everyone learning the same thing, each student is learning whatever they are most passionate about. And if there are teachers, because this is a flat hierarchy and student-driven, if there are teachers, the teachers are not leading the education. The teachers aren't deciding what the students are learning. The students are deciding what they're learning, and then they ask the teachers for help when they want it. So the teachers act more like consultants, usually, in a green stage education. Also, there's a little more emphasis on holistic development and on understanding things like cultural relativism and the importance of taking care of the environment. So you can definitely see green stage values in that kind of education system. And I shouldn't say education system, because green stage kind of eschews systems in general. So green style education often doesn't look very much like a system. Yellow stage education is pretty much autodidactic learning. It's very self-motivated. All you need is the internet. If you need an expert, yellow stage thinking is, okay, I'll find one and I'll contact them. It's also not really an education system. Yellow stage learning, the perspective is, the world is my school, everybody is a teacher. So a system isn't really needed in yellow stage education either. The first stage after orange stage that needs an education system, again, is turquoise. So essentially, what I've shown here so far is the history of education. And now I'm going to talk about the future of education. So turquoise is our next education system. And to give a sense about how different that is from our current conventional education system, think about how different our current education system is from the education system of the Middle Ages, which was essentially monasteries. Pretty different, right? And now think about how different the alternative education movement is from our current conventional education system. Also pretty different. Flat hierarchy, the students are running the show. It's also highly collaborative. Orange stage tends to focus more on competition instead of collaboration. So green stage education is very different from orange stage education. Orange stage education is very different from blue stage education. Each stage is quite different from its predecessor. And now notice that I'm about to talk about turquoise stage education, which is 1, 2, 3 stages ahead of our current conventional education system. So think about how different that's going to be. And now, before I actually describe it, I want to talk about where I'm getting my information from. Basically, I'm getting it from inner guidance, visions, non-drug assisted visions, divination, signs, directly asking my higher self, things like that. And then I am taking what I get from those methods and reverse engineering those results into a curriculum and a pedagogy. So, for example, I'm watching my visions of the future about how the school looks like it's operating, what the students look like they're doing, and then I'm trying to reverse engineer that to figure out, okay, what must the curriculum and pedagogy be if that's what people are doing? And to do that reverse engineering, I'm using my own experiences as a student in multiple types of educational settings and my own experiences as an educator in a variety of contexts, and my observations of other educators. And I'm also using logic, contemplation, and thought experiments, so left brain thinking, and further research about things like consciousness progression, the history of education, and contemporary education movements. And some of this research about contemporary education I'm doing secondhand by reading books and watching videos and things like that. But I'm also participating in some different styles of education to experience what they're like from the inside. And then I take my candidates for parts of the curriculum and pedagogy and I test them and iterate on them using test students, including myself. So that gives you a context of where this is coming from that I'm about to describe. And now I'm going to describe it. So our next education system, which is primarily a turquoise stage education system, is centered around mastery of the deep mystical arts, similarly to how the orange stage education has been centered around science and mathematics. So mystical arts or magical arts, spiritual development, those kinds of things are central to the turquoise stage education system. And because of that, a core attribute that is being developed in students is wisdom. The turquoise stage education system is also very aware of consciousness progression. Consciousness progression is built into the system. This is the first education system where consciousness progression is actually built into the system. The system itself is hierarchical and structured, which might make it look like a blue stage, where were we? Blue stage education system, especially since its structure can actually be fairly strict, but it's not a dominator hierarchy like Blue Stage is. This is hierarchical because it's focusing on a growth hierarchy. And this hierarchy and structure is intrinsic in what the students are learning. Deep mastery of the mystical arts is something that you can't acquire just by exploring on your own or even researching on your own. It really requires work across multiple generations. So that's where the hierarchy and structure comes from, is from the hard work of the teachers who have gone before you on the path, and they're showing you what works, and then you're following that as a student. Also, for the same reason, the turquoise stage education system is connected to wisdom traditions. This is going to be a single wisdom tradition for each school, depending on which culture it's in. So whatever the culture is that is the context of a given school, that culture's wisdom tradition is going to be the basis for that school's version of the education system. It's also going to require physical locations, because in the mystical and magical arts and in spiritual development in general, physical proximity to adepts, to people who are farther along on the path, actually helps your own progression through energy resonance. So this is an education system that can't be done remotely, unfortunately. There's a strong focus on life purpose. This education system helps the students find their life purpose and start practicing it. And the whole thing is inner guidance driven. This is a very turquoise stage thing. So not only are the students being encouraged to follow their own inner guidance, but the school itself, all of its operations, from daily operations to great big decisions, are all inner guidance driven. None of these decisions are made with left brain thinking. And that kind of points to the entire structure is fractal. So I just gave an example of inner guidance that has a fractal nature, where the students are being trained in using their inner guidance, but also the administration of the school is inner guidance driven. So you can see how that part is fractal. Another example is the holistic nature of the education system. The students are trained in developing themselves holistically as individuals. And also, the school itself has a holistic set of goals, I suppose you could call them, where it is actively participating in the development of the consciousness of humanity and of having a holistic relationship with the planet, all the way up to having a holistic relationship with the on a cosmic scale through multiple layers of reality. And if you want to know what I mean by layers of reality, I have a video specifically about that too. So the education system has a holistic approach individually, globally, and cosmically. It also has a recursive, self-improving structure. So the education system itself actively evolves. It's designed to evolve and adapt over time as humans progress in consciousness and our needs for our education system change. Our needs change. Again, this is the first education system that does this because it's aware of consciousness progression. So I actually, in a way, what I'm seeing in my future visions is it's almost like this is our last education system. in, like, depending on how you see it, because this education system intentionally changes itself. And then it's also symbiotic, and it's symbiotic in a way that is fractal in structure as well. So the education system has, or I should say, each individual school in the education system has a symbiotic relationship with everything around it at multiple layers of scopes. So local scope, a broader remote scope, I suppose, with people who have a stake in the education in that particular school, and then also with the other schools of the education system. And it has symbiotic relationships with humanity at large, the planet, and the cosmos, including multiple layers of reality. And that leads into this special additional aspect of this education system, which is that from what I've seen in visions, it looks like each school has its own working group of magical adepts. And what I mean by the word working is it's a functional group. It has jobs to do, and it does them. And this working group of magical adepts, its sole purpose is to directly serve capital C consciousness. So it's not about doing what the individual magical adepts want to do, like their individual desires. It's purely about directly serving capital C consciousness through inner guidance methods. And because of this, it serves as essentially a post-grad education for people who are progressing into the second half of Tier 2. So going back again to the spiral, that is teal, plum, and aubergine. As people progress into these stages, they become much more interested in spiritual development, yes, but more specifically serving capital C consciousness. Oh, and the coral part I forgot to mention. So some of the things I've described here are actually coral stage qualities, like the fractal structure. Also, this recursive structure is a coral stage style thing. So I say primarily turquoise. It definitely has coral influence as well. Everything is fractal. There's a strong understanding of other layers of reality. And also, shadow work is an integral part of the education. There are counselors in the schools, and the counselors are not just add-ons. They are actually an intrinsic part of the education. So what makes, one of the things that I mentioned that makes this education system unique is its awareness of consciousness progression. And that shows up in all the way from the earliest version of the education, so what we would call like K through 12 or something like that in America. Young kids going through this education system. The education system for young kids is not turquoise stage stuff. It is like the content isn't turquoise stage content. It's actually intentionally bringing the students through their consciousness progression, typically up through green stage, in a way that actively facilitates their preparation for a tier 2 higher education. And then the higher education, which would be the equivalent of college in the United States, that education is helping students through yellow stage, turquoise stage, coral stage, and then if they choose to continue progressing after that, then they can choose to join the group of magical adepts, and that will take them through the rest of tier 2 and potentially even into the beginning of tier 3, which I actually haven't talked about yet. So that's it. That is the history and future of education for humanity done from a spiral dynamics perspective. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments below. This is a very foundational video for a lot of things that I want to talk about on this channel. So I hope that it was informative, and I hope that you enjoyed it.